If you have a worry, one of the best things to have is to know that somebody else is sharing that concern with you. Like, I automatically feel less anxious if somebody else is going to worry about this alongside of me. That way there's two of us solving this problem. I think that's a technique I've seen work in business development, is just an appreciation for the risk the other party feels like they're taking as well too, and that I'm here to share that risk with you. What appears to be less important is hardball negotiation, scales with names like aggressiveness, persuasiveness, which is, it's a give and take, doesn't appear to be quite as predictive as it used to be. Excitement, which is coming in with a whole bunch of energy, the sort of what I see sometimes as the marginally silly and goofy approach to sales. They're buying a $3 million CT scan. They don't need you to be funny. And a scale called ego reward, which is how important it is for me to be in the spotlight as a salesperson. In general, more experienced people have less to teach than they think they do. The younger generation has more to learn than they think they do. But what happens is you'll see a polarization, right? Is the older folks try really, really hard to teach, and it bounces off the younger folks.
What practical advice would you give to businesses, sales leaders looking to leverage psychology in their sales strategies? Assessments, what are some things they can do?
I mean, it's self-referential, but...
You are listening to the Best Sellers podcast presented by Doug Dvorak, where the focus is elevating your sales boom. The Best Sellers podcast, your ultimate destination for winning sales strategies.
Good day, Bestseller Podcast Nation. Hi, I'm Doug Dvorak, founder and managing principal of the Sales Coaching Institute. I'm also your host for the Best Sellers Podcast. I am so psyched today. I have Terence Bostic, PhD in psychology from St. Louis University. Terence is the managing partner at CMA Global in St. Louis. And Terence's areas of focus as an industrial psychologist are talent management, executive coaching, and assessments for selecting new employees and team members. Terence, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. That's a great introduction. I hope I can live up to that.
You will. I am so excited. I've had so many requests for people telling me it's really stressful selling in 2024 with the explosion of AI. Am I relevant? Trying to reach the numbers, travel, stress, getting deals done. I'm so excited. So, Terence, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the field of business psychology?
Sure. I think, like a lot of people, I went into college not exactly sure what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a biologist. So sometimes I describe myself as a failed biologist. About 2/3 of the way through college, I started taking psychology classes, really liked them, found out that I was good at it, then went on to graduate school. And while I was in graduate school getting my doctorate, a buddy of mine says, hey, you've got a little bit of extra time for your degree. Why don't you take some electives in industrial psychology, organizational psychology, and, yada, yada, yada. 25 years later, here I am. So, it was a little bit of happenstance. And then, sometimes you figure out what you're good at by just doing it once or twice. And then I've been here at CMA Global for 20 years now, doing, plus or minus the same sort of thing I'm doing now, which is helping organizations pick out and develop people that can help the organization be successful, and helping those teams and people, thrive through some very difficult times.
Excellent. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about industrial psychology and then the psychology of selling, and what piqued your interest in the psychology of selling? Yeah,
absolutely. So, industrial psychology is pretty broad, and it ranges from everything from like the people that help design cockpits in airplanes to, change management when two companies merge together. So it's pretty broad. Selling is very interesting. It's a subset of, in our minds, leadership. We do a lot of assessment work. A lot of industrial psychology training is about helping companies evaluate new talent, helping that talent grow. And selling, I think, is the most challenging of all of the parts of industry to really do good assessment work around, because it can be so idiosyncratic what makes someone successful. In general, I think we think about it, especially at the higher level, is selling is really a subset of leadership. At its core, it's the ability to influence and persuade someone to do something that they might not otherwise do if you hadn't interacted with them. So There's a lot of research out there on what makes good leaders when it comes to psychology. There's some out there with selling as well too, but frankly, I think that the assessment and the development of sales professionals, especially for complex sales or for selling services, that's the horizon for our industry. It's some of the hardest work that we do because it can be a little frustrating, right? Like it's a little bit hard to figure out, why is that one salesperson my top performer and this other person I hired, gee, sure looks and sounds a lot like her, but they're not performing at the same level. Why is that? So we think about it kind of as a subset of leadership.
Excellent. The old adage, great salespeople are born. What is your take on that statement?
So it seems like if you look at a sales organization, you'll probably always have a couple of the unicorns that are in there that maybe are different than the rest of the organization, but are just really strong performers, and we'll assess and evaluate them. And they won't look like the rest of your sales organization, but something about them just seems to work. And I'm going to make the number up, but those might be, 5 or 10% of your sales organization. Then you probably have the reliable B+, A- players. And those are the people that may have a wider variety of personality traits, but will follow some sort of codified behavioral pattern that seems to work for them, selling whatever that product or service is, or inside of whatever that industry is. And that's going to vary pretty significantly industry to industry. But really looking at the behavior, will help you determine whether or not that person's likely going to be successful. It's not exactly a routine, but like we know that this works if we're going to sell MRI machines to hospitals. You're always going to have your unicorns, but the reliable middle part of the curve, there's more variability in kind of what personality traits would be useful. What doesn't hurt though is a critical thinking. The more complex the sale, the more critical thinking is required for it. That's a difficult thing to coach. That's a nice thing to be able to hire for. It's not quite as important as we thought it used to be, but it still does help out a fair amount if you can have someone who's helping your client solve the problem, right? At some level, sales is about solving a problem.
Exactly. Excellent. Terrence, why is understanding the psychology behind selling important for businesses today and sales leaders?
It seems like, at least it seems to us, that sales is like a lot of things in our society, is either getting more polarized or bifurcated. The things that are going to be commodities are likely going to be sold through lower touch approaches. The ability for people to buy things at auctions, to buy things online, to buy things with really minimal contact with a sales organization is going to go up. And that part of the market's probably going to get automated. But it's going to get more and more complicated on the other side of that marketplace, where it is the complex sale, the long sale, where, I like the old adage is people still buy from people, right? Where the relationship is still going to matter in that product or service. And at that point, that's where the people really matter, where the salesperson, really is going to be the conduit to revenue. And that does appear to be getting increasingly complex. Part of the industry is going to go over this way to sort of, the automated, easy to bid, but the other part is going to get to become increasingly complex. And we're going to have to both find those salespeople and then take care of them in a way that's going to allow them to maximize their performance. Their work is pretty stressful, right? There's lots of folks out there with the preponderance of their revenue, the preponderance of their personal revenue is a function of how well they do over this month. It's inherently stressful work.
Yes. Excellent. Terrence, when we look at the psychology of selling, specifically understanding the buyer and buyer behavior, what are some common psychological triggers that influence buyer behavior?
There's a pretty widely held belief finding that even though we will use different words for it, trust really matters a whole lot. And a lot of times what we're brokering really when we're in a business development setting is trust. And we can get that trust either transferred from another relationship, like, we've already done business with this company, and so you're our new account representative, so we're likely going to trust you, or something about your history or background is going to help me trust you, and the human brain's sort of silly, like, you went to Vanderbilt, I went to Vanderbilt. Oh, we should probably trust each other. Well, there's no reason for that, right? But that sort of thing works. The ability to quickly broker trust with whoever you're selling to does appear to be one of those highly predictive factors. And like I said, it can either be borrowed from the circumstance or for the very astute business development person. And I think this is what some of those unicorns do very well. They're able to generate that, very difficult to describe experience of trust coming from the potential customer very quickly. A lot of that comes from their ability to read the person in the situation, get the nonverbals. But that appears to be able to speed up the process or increase our likelihood for success.
When I work with individuals doing executive sales coaching or consulting to organizations on sales strategy, I say there's two things required before you start selling. That has to be established in a meaningful, authentic way, trust and rapport. So thanks for unpacking the importance of trust. Any tips on beyond, I went to Vanderbilt, the client went to Vanderbilt, any nuggets on establishing trust in a meaningful, authentic, quick way when working with a new prospect or client?
Some of this is probably basic sales training 101, but I'll back it up with social science. I'm sure we've heard this from some vice president of sales at some point, is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, that listening matters a whole lot more than talking. I think you'll oftentimes see unsuccessful business development people think that they've got to talk their way into more trust. I think in general, you listen your way to better trust. The other pithy chestnut I'll blow off is the best way to be interesting is to be interested.
Excellent.
To really go fishing for what's important to them and to be able to find the thing that's important to them and then attach yourself to it, as opposed to, floundering around like, where'd you go to school? Or were you in a sorority? Oh, I was in that sorority, that sort of stuff. I see that you have a golf club up there. I bet you like golf. That usually rings hollow. But to not be afraid to really do some good investigation, figure out what they like, and then find what you should attach to, as opposed to over talking in a situation.
You and I are so aligned on sales excellence and sales training, earning the right for that prospect or client's time we don't do cold calls, we do warm calls. What's the difference between cold and warm? Research and preparation, doing the heavy lifting. If it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes to understand their business drivers, going to their LinkedIn profile. But then I ask them the questions, when was the last time you really felt listened to deeply? We're all living at such a Mach 5 pace that people don't take the time, especially salespeople. They think telling is selling, but great listening, earning the right for that appointment, and understanding their business drivers. Great listening. That's such an important takeaway. Thank you. Terrence, how do emotions play a role in the decision-making process of buyers?
In my experience, the buyer, either that's buying something that's low cost or high cost, is oftentimes driven by fear. They don't want to disappoint their manager, and they're probably dealing with a fairly large number. So it seems like in a lot of situations that it's really more in their mind risk mitigation than it is taking advantage of a great opportunity. And I'll see sales organizations get frustrated with this because they may have something that's innovative or it's a little bit more expensive, but it's a whole lot better. But really, when you're on the other side of the table, oftentimes they're trying to mitigate risk. They don't want to get in trouble with their boss, or they've got a $7 million budget and this is going to be $2 million of it. I think sometimes we fail to recognize the amount of anxiety on the other side of the table, and we try to impress them when we're probably better off trying to allay their fears. I think sometimes, there used to be an old joke that nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM, right? Because IBM is just well known, I think some of that's true when we're selling as well too, is you just got to be mindful that sometimes they're looking to do the safe thing. So the better we can help them feel like they're doing the safe thing, with us, I think the more it increases the likelihood that they'll do business with us.
Excellent. And Terrence, how can we use the psychology of selling to better understand the needs and wants of our customers?
Most requests usually have at least 1 or 2 layers behind them. And I think getting to what's the 1 or 2 layers behind them is oftentimes what separates, those unicorns, people that are doing the top 5% of your revenue, is they're able to quickly get in there and figure out what's the real problem or the real worry that they're trying to solve. And I think a really professional business development person is good at doing that. When they train physicians in medical school, they train them on bedside manner. And we've all had physicians with good and bad bedside manner, right? Even somebody with bad bedside manner, what they train them to do is listen to the patient tell the story, sit down on the foot of the bed, and look them in the eye and say, it sounds like that was pretty hard for you. I'm not saying we have to do exactly that when we're selling something, but sort of the empathic understanding of, this is a big deal for you. This sounds like it's a really big project. Or, we do a fair amount of work in construction. You're buying a $800 million airport expansion. Like if we get this wrong, that's going to be in the newspapers. I think the people that are really good at that work are able to help the person on the other side of the table feel like they're kind of sharing that anxiety with them. Because if you have a worry, one of the best things to have is to know that somebody else is sharing that concern with you. Like, I automatically feel less anxious if somebody else is going to worry about this alongside of me. That way there's two of us solving this problem. I think that's a technique I've seen work in business development, is just an appreciation for the risk the other party feels like they're taking as well too. And that I'm here to share that risk with you.
Excellent. In the context of objections in the sales process and in selling in general, some individual salespeople, sales leaders think objections are bad. They're good because it doesn't show indifference. It shows interest. If you don't have any objections, you have no interest, and you need to stop, unpack, and go back to the start of the sales process. But what are some of the common psychological barriers that cause potential customers to say no in your experience?
I think, by the way, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a brother who's a professor of education, and he says it's only the engaged students that ask the really annoying questions. I think the same is true of an objections, right? Great. Now you're telling me what you don't want. Thank you. I can sharpen up a little bit here. I think oftentimes when I see people getting to know, especially if they're not trying to get to know, I've seen some salespeople work to let's get to know quickly so I can move on. When they get to know, it's usually because they haven't done what you were talking about earlier. They haven't done either the research and the investigation up front. So they came in with something that was misaligned. They made the ask too early, or they didn't really go in and do the investigation on that person and find the ways to build the trust with them that would make it easy for them to say yes. I think it is about homework, not only on what it is that you're selling, but the person that you're selling to. And more diligence there, I think, reduces the likelihood of a no, or at least getting a softer no that you might have more opportunity to get around.
Excellent. Thank you. We talked a little bit on the front end of today's podcast about what you do to help train A players, C's to B's, B's to A's. What psychological traits and skills are important for a successful salesperson today in 2024?
It's interesting. So getting ready for this, I ran some analysis. I did some research on, we have, our company's 45 years old. So we have data going back 45 years on this. And so I looked at some psychological data related to successful business development professionals from starting in just after 2000 until now, and kind of what happened in the middle of COVID. Mm-hmm. And I can talk a little bit about what seems to be less important, what seems to be more important, because this is a little eye-opening for me as well too. There's some stuff that is just going to help regardless. Good critical thinking skills, a good ability to read the cues of other people, a good ability to predict the emotions of others. Being an amateur psychologist is a pretty good skill for salespeople, right? We're trying to figure out what matters to that person. Where they spend their time in the business development process does appear to be a little bit different. So what appears to be less important is hardball negotiation, scales with names like aggressiveness. That ability, like, what's it going to take to get you into this Chevy Malibu today, right? That appears to be less predictive of success than it was 10, 15 years ago. Persuasiveness, which it's a scale that actually measures sort of the ability to negotiate back and forth. That give and take doesn't appear to be quite as predictive as it used to be. Excitement, which is coming in with a whole bunch of energy, the sort of what I see sometimes as the marginally silly and goofy approach to sales, where they're buying a $3 million CT scan. They don't need you to be funny. And a scale called ego reward, which is how important it is for me to be in the spotlight as a salesperson. I think this is a tough one because in our experience, sometimes people think that good salespeople are like really hard boiled and resilient, and they are, but they're also pretty sensitive and their success matters to them. But those appear to be things that are a little bit less important than they used to be pre-COVID. I also got to give a shout out to our folks at Management Research Group. They're the company that makes the sales performance assessment for us. They're fantastic, and they were research partners with us on this. What's more important, and I think this is really the punchline, is salespeople that are better strategic thinkers, that are better able to get in and figure out how does this product or service help my customer, and how am I managing my pipeline over the long term, appears to be much more predictive of success than it was a decade ago. Deep technical knowledge and understanding about why this product or service fits into your business and all the features and benefits that it has appears to be more important. The ability to create a rigorous pipeline and follow that in a process-oriented standpoint. Communication matters a little bit more than influence, it looks like right now. So that's, I'm going to go back and do the 8th touch as opposed to try to sell in really hard on my 3rd touch. Mm-hmm. 2 more. Empathy, so the ability to read and respond to the emotional cue of others appears to be more important. I think that's because we're all, frankly, more sensitive and on edge than we were, right? It's just work is tougher. There's some crazy research on how bad burnout is right now. And being a better team player, that many sales organizations now are a little less lone wolf, a little bit more team player. So the ability to do that well appears to be more predictive. So I apologize for that exhaustive list, but we did the research. I was excited about it.
Excellent. You mentioned burnout, and I remember when back 15, 20 years ago, there was a formula. If you're interviewing a team member, sales leader, sales rep, if they've had more than 3 jobs in 5 years, you don't hire them. According to Indeed and a lot of other great research on shelf life of a sales VP or leader, 24 months or less. Average shelf life of a sales professional, 2 to 2.5 years. Can you tell me why the compressed shelf life of sales leaders and salespeople today? Is it just by virtue of a very fluid society? I'll go to another opportunity for another 10,000 a year. Why are salespeople specifically moving so much, and why are sales leaders getting burned out and turning and churning so much?
I can give you our best guess on this because I think you are describing one of the great questions in where we overlap in our industries. We have the exact same data set that you do, by the way. Is the C-suite executive, the senior executive with the shortest half-life is absolutely the VP of sales, the chief commercial officer, whatever they're called in the organization. And we have the same numbers that you do. It's about 2 years. If I had to guess, I think it's because it's the most easy and obvious place for an organization to make a change with the belief that this is gonna be the thing, that has the impact that we want. Used to in healthcare, if the hospital wasn't going well, the thing that you would do you'd fire the hospital president. It really doesn't have all that much impact on hospital operations. I think it's removing and replacing the senior sales executives is sort of the theater oftentimes that can help the rest of the C-suite show the board that we're doing something about it over here, or we all want to find a villain at some point, right? So if we can make the sales organization the problem, and we can replace those people maybe more easily than we can replace the people in technology. So I believe, this and $4 will still buy me a latte. I believe that it's oftentimes happens because it's just the most visible way for a company to show that we're making a change around here. I do also think that good salespeople have one of the more portable job sets. If you're good, if you figured out the formula in your industry, you can move around pretty quickly, and there's opportunities for you to make incrementally more money. And we do get worried when people are at a place for less than 2 years, because if you're selling something that has any complexity to it, right, you're really not. When we do longitudinal research on, hey, how well did we predict success for the sales organization? We look, frankly, between years 2 and 5. That's hopefully when somebody's figured out the formula and they haven't burned out yet. That's when they're really grinding away. So long, rambly answer. I think part of it has to do with it's the theater that shows that we're doing something around here when revenue's down.
Analogous to sports, team's not doing well. What's the first thing they do? Fire the head coach.
Fire the head coach.
Yeah. So, Terrence, how can salespeople develop resilience and handle rejection in a more positive, psychologically more productive way? Because there's so much rejection, getting ghosted on calls. You try to work your pipeline and people are hard to get a hold of. But how can we help salespeople, or how do you help sales professionals develop resilience and handle all this rejection?
The The good news is what appears to work for most other professions also appears to work for salespeople. So there's a whole bunch on the psychology of resilience out there. And I mean, I guess in a way it's good that it's a topic because we're talking about it, and, sorry that we have to research it because it's a problem. The most potent thing that we have, I think, to fight burnout right now is the experience of gratitude. Everybody talks about it. It's one of the few emotional states that we can reliably create in ourselves. So if whatever you're feeling right now that's bad, you can replace it with gratitude. If you go to YouTube, you can search up probably 10,000 YouTube videos on gratitude. Marty Seligman is a psychologist who kind of coined the phrase and has done a fair amount of the work on gratitude. But what we found is that if you can find 3 things that you were grateful about today, and you can document them, talk about them to a significant other, write them down, or even just say them to yourself. If you look for those 3 good things every day, what you'll find happens is that you'll start looking for those good things on future days, and you'll be able to replace, when people get rejection, right? That's the thing that sticks in their head. No matter all the other good stuff that happens, they got rejected, 4 times that day, right? Well, they had a bunch of other good calls. What we have to do is we have to replace that sticky bad news, which is the rejections, with some sticky good news, which appears to be what that discipline about gratitude seems to do. So another way you can Google it is 3 good things. 3 good things is some of the methodology about gratitude. The only other really potent thing that seems to work is the experience of awe, AWE. The only thing more powerful than gratitude is awe. The problem is, to create the experience of awe, usually you need like the mountains or a sunset or holding a newborn baby. Those things create awe. Gratitude you can create all on your own, just you and your brain. So I'm in our coaching work, I'm a big fan of getting people some discipline around that. I do it every day. I run almost every day, and I can't finish my run until I've done my 3 good things exercise in my brain, because we try to practice what we preach.
That's great advice. I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, and I love one of his quotes: "Culture eats strategy for lunch." And I see great sales talent, well-intentioned, hardworking, and they can't be successful for 2 reasons. The culture is toxic, and B, as you know, great salespeople don't leave companies; they leave bad bosses.
Exactly.
So can you share with us, the importance of culture on motivation and performance for salespeople, please?
That's a really good question. And by the way, 5 decades of research back it up. People join organizations and they leave managers. It's a pithy saying, and there's 50 years of data to prove that it's true. It's also, it fits intuitively too, right? We've all joined an organization and left a bad boss. I think, especially with the generation that's entering the workforce right now, the work experience is going to be more important to them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. They're going to have expectations around the work experience that's going to be higher than the generations that came before it, which means that workplace culture is going to manage more than it used to, which puts more weight on sales managers to create that kind of environment. I think that the next generation, the current generation and the next generation of salespeople will vote with their feet even more quickly than the past generation did. And it puts more emphasis on those vice presidents of sales, directors of sales, to create the kind of engagement that they want at the workplace. I mean, the fact that aggressiveness is less of a predictor of success and team player is more predictive of success tells me that, some of the archaic models we have around what makes a good salesperson, probably needs to be replaced. And I think the successful sales organizations are going to be run by sales managers that can get that and implement that.
A data point here in the last couple of days: first time in history of work in this country where we have up to 4 and sometimes 5 generations working together. And I am trying to understand, the Gen Zs and that younger generation, because I work and train with them. Can you share some advice to sales leaders that are, our age, when working, using the psychology of selling, when working with younger generations, to get them more engaged and speak their language and communicate with them?
Yes, and I thought I could be funny there because I have teenage daughters and I could use some of the current lingo. But whenever I try that, I'm reminded by them that I'm like 2 years out of date. So I'm going to hold off on that.
Okay.
So we talk about cohort effects. Like there are some differences between people that are, were born in this time and born in this time. And then there's also some things that 50-year-olds have always said about 20-year-olds. There's a presentation that we give, and it's got a quote, and the quote is like, young people these days don't listen to their elders, have bad table manners, and are generally lazy. And I think it's from Socrates. It's from like 300 BC. But it sounds like
great.
It sounds like what a crabby old person
sounds like
thinks.
Yesterday.
Exactly. So you've got to realize that there's some things that 50-year-olds have always said about 20-year-olds. And you're right. We have 4 generations in the workforce. So what does that mean? I think it's important that both ends of that spectrum recognize a truism. And in general, more experienced people have less to teach than they think they do. But less experienced people have more to learn.
One more time on it. That is very interesting. I've never heard that. Could you please repeat that?
If you're in that top generation, as much as you want to teach, you probably have less to teach than you think you do.
Wow.
The younger generation has more to learn than they think they do. But what happens is you'll see a polarization, right? Is the older folks try really, really hard to teach, and it bounces off the younger folks. The reason is we all kind of get like this when I'm on the wrong side of 50 as well, is you just believe that my experience is, I want to be helpful, right? And a lot of that helpfulness comes from, me doing things, I trained in the 90s and things are different. So a lot of what I think is helpful and relevant probably isn't. And by me trying to emphasize that with younger folks coming in, I'm going to do them a disservice and me a disservice. On the other side of the equation, the incoming generation has to wrestle with the fact that they do have more to learn than they realize they do. But we're probably not going to cross that gap by trying too hard to teach them. That's why one of the things that we see talked about, written about, is engagement in the workplace. When you get an employee that's engaged, regardless of their age, they're going to have an openness to learning new things and a kind of lowering that barrier of suspicion when you're really engaged. So it really is going to be about creating engagement, which I think is going to help the communication. There's lots of great things. One of my best mentors in business development worked for IBM in the 60s and 70s. He's the kind of guy that had 5 blue suits and still wore a hat to work. And that's not, completely relevant to what I do, but some of just the truisms about, be a pro, say no, tell a client when they're about to do something that's a bad idea and walk away from a deal. Some of that is just as valuable as it was back then. The other one, apparently I'm full of quotes today. The other one is Winston Churchill. He said, I love to learn. I just hate to be taught. I think we're all kind of that way.
That's excellent. And I too, I'm a recovering IBMer. I spent 7 years there in global services, and what a great organization.
Yeah.
Just commitment to excellence. The customer's always right. As you said, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. So as we transition, how does, in the context of the psychology of selling, how does goal setting impact the performance of salespeople and sales teams, Terrence?
The research on goal setting is that the most productive organizations tend to set goals that are seen by others as just being slightly out of reach. So it's obvious, it's bad to either sandbag, right? Like to set the very easily attainable goal or the goal that makes people completely roll their eyes at. The most successful sales organizations set the goal that just seems just a touch unreasonable. And goal setting also seems to matter a whole lot. Why is Weight Watchers so effective for weight management? It's not really because of the diets they put you on. It's because of the accountability that's the weigh-ins. And, goal setting and accountability appears to be one of the kind of simple disciplines that we can all do. So doing that and doing it in a way where everybody feels just slightly uncomfortable with the goal appears to be where the top of the curve is.
Excellent. As we transition into the next question about case studies, example, real world applications, Terrence, can you share any real world examples or case studies where the psychology of selling or psychological principles significantly improved sales or culture or engagement?
We work for an organization that is a food broker. So they're the middle people between the manufacturers and the grocery stores. And for years, they've had their eye on a large national chain in America whose name we would all know and could probably go and visit if we went to Arkansas. And the challenge was they had not ever had to campaign that long and that hard to work with a company that was that big and that complicated. And the sort of the psychology that they had to engage in was around persistence and perseverance, even though there was no immediate payoff. I mean, it was probably a 3 to 5, I'd say a 3-year campaign before they established a beachhead, and 5 years before they really started making money at it. And for sales organizations that are used to making yearly numbers or monthly numbers, and how many calls did you do this week, by the way? They had to make a shift that really focused on persistence and I guess moving forward, even though they didn't think that there was going to be gold at the end of that tunnel. And that required a bit of a change in culture because, these are salespeople that are making, good 6-figure incomes. So why should I work that hard to develop a relationship that I could be gone by the time we get there? And so we did change comp a little bit in a couple different ways. But I think from a culture standpoint, getting the organization to think on a longer time frame, all the way down from the chief sales officer to the frontline salespeople, that helped them now be in that marketplace where you get 4 or 5 SKUs in one of those big national stores. That can be a 7 or 8 digit number for that company. So that's one case study I can think of about where culturally they went from just having a kind of a shorter term mindset to a longer term mindset. It's a privately held company, so they have the luxury of doing that. But I think it's really increased the value of that company.
Excellent. As we look to trends and future outlook, the future of sales psychology, how is the field of sales psychology, industrial psychology evolving with new technology and data analytics?
I joke that when you go to an industrial psychology conference right now, there's only 2 types of talks. One is how awesome AI is, and the other one is how AI ruined everything. And I'm sure one of those is true. I really do think that we are at the same time kind of in the brave new world because we have access to so much data and we have better tools for analyzing those data. And those data will trick us and fool us into believing wrong patterns. I still salute our robot overlords, who I'm sure will be running all these things here, and I'm sure they're listening in, so I want to say hi to them. But I do think that professional sales organizations are going to be figuring out how do they use AI. Right now, it's kind of the sexy new tool that everybody wants to use. In our experience, there's lots of people that talk about it. There's very few people that do it effectively. I think it's a place for sales organizations. The kind of data mining that you can do about your customer base, if it's B2C, or even if it's B2B, it's going to be much more powerful. But it's also not a place for amateurs. I'll work on plumbing stuff around the house, but I won't work on electricity because nobody dies from a plumbing mistake. But, and I do think that large professional sales organizations are beginning to invest in real expertise on AI as opposed to dabbling around it. Because I've seen plenty of amateurs inside of organizations being, the AI person at the company, because they've watched a couple of YouTube videos. So I think that's going to tell us a lot about the future. And I still think the actual buying decisions are going to be made by people. So everything we know about, being able to import trust into that relationship is going to be the thing that actually closes the deal.
Excellent. A couple closing questions. Some practical advice for businesses. What practical advice would you give to businesses, sales leaders looking to leverage psychology in their sales strategies? Assessments, what are some things they can do?
I mean, it's self-referential, but we assess salespeople before they get hired, especially if they have, targets that are 6 or 7 figures, because that is something that you can predict better than you can in an interview. It's one of the jokes. It's, VPs of sales are usually pretty easy marks, right? You want to sell a car to somebody who's in sales. They're actually pretty easy marks. So getting some objective data on the table about that person, I think, can be very useful. A part of that you can do, even if you don't use firms like us, is you don't have to codify your sales process down to a formula, but go and investigate what behaviors actually result in in good results. People will assume that it's the hail fellow well met, or the ability to work a room, or something else like that. Go and investigate. Be like an industrial engineer. Do a time and motion study on your best performers and find out what they're actually doing, because a lot of that can be taught or reinforced to other people. That doesn't have to be a personality characteristic that they developed when they were 12 years old. I think that's the place where some sales organizations can. That's not exactly easy, but that's something that you can even do internally. Figure out what are the sales behaviors that get us results here, and how do we reinforce those and teach those to folks as they come in.
Excellent. And closing thought, final insights. What are the key takeaways you'd like our listeners to remember from this awesome discussion?
That sales is getting more complicated, and so we need to think about what works now, which appears to be using salespeople that have a more strategic mindset, are able to talk features and benefits better than they used to be, are persistent communicators as opposed to aggressive negotiators, and can really are the armchair psychologists. They're skilled at reading people and can bring that trust in quickly, and that if we want to keep salespeople around, it's going to be the culture and the values that their sales manager, VP of sales, chief commercial officer are going to be able to create in their sales organization. When we do analysis studies on our impact, we look at years between 2 and 5. Like, that's when somebody should be thriving as a salesperson. I think sales leaders can do a lot to help their sales force stick around for 24 months, because that's when they really ought to be performing for you.
Excellent. I missed the front end of your quote. Aggressive negotiators, they should be something communicators. What'd you say?
Persistent communicators. It appears that,
persistent communicators opposed to aggressive negotiators.
Exactly. Yeah.
Love it.
The eighth light touch appears to be more predictive of sales success than the third aggressive touch. Used to be.
I'm writing this down. Light touch is more impactful than the third hard touch. Awesome. All right. And Terrence, this has been awesome. My mind's on fire on just all this excellent data points. And thank you for your great preparation for today's podcast, The Psychology of Selling. If our listeners want to learn more about you and CMA Global, how can they get in touch with you, Terrence?
I'm T. Bostic at cmaconsult.com, or you can go to www.cmaconsult.com and you can learn more about us there. We're a 45-year-old company. There's 25 people like me here. We've got offices across America.
Excellent. Well, a big shout out and thank you to Terence Bostic, PhD, managing partner with CMA Global in St. Louis. Thank you, Bestsellers Podcast Nation. I'm Doug Dvorak, founder and managing principal of the Sales Coaching Institute. Check us out at salescoach.us. And if you'd like to download this podcast, you can go to salescoach.us/podcast, and I can be reached at doug@dougdvorak.com. Good luck and good selling. If you made it all the way here, thank you for listening to the Bestsellers Podcast, your ultimate destination for winning sales strategy. We hope you loved this episode. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcast platform to never miss an episode. See you on the next one.